Reflections with theologian Father James Basic, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
Man and God are cooperating in the building up of the kingdom in this world. We are creating with God a better world. In a sense, we are partners with God. We're made in God's image and likeness, and therefore we have a task in the world. And that would immediately free us to use our brains to try to make progress. It would say there's something partly good, at least, about technology and the advances that science has provided us with, that that's a human thing to do.
Joining Father Basic in this discussion is Dr. Richard Wright, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of dialogue between doctors and theologians. Here's Father Basic.
Richard, I find it fascinating to talk with you because of your background and interest in the whole area of medical morality. And you know it from both a speculative and practical side, and I think that's a fascinating kind of combination and one that is really very helpful. So are you ready to talk a little bit about that?
We can try.
Okay, why not? Let's talk in general, first of all, about the problems involved in the whole conversation between the theologian and the doctor. I see you as sort of a middle person in a way, as a good bridge kind of person, but maybe I should say it from the viewpoint of the theologian. One of our problems is that the problems are so complex, it's so hard to understand them. Medical science is making advances so fast that it's like we can't keep up with them. Technology's roaring forward, and we're able to do so many new things in the hospitals and in the laboratories, and the theologians haven't had time to really work on this, and they have to be expert on this. I mean, I myself am not a moral theologian. I'm sort of outside my field as I talk about all of this, but in just reading a bit of the literature, you can see how the theologians are struggling just to understand the problem to begin with, and trying to know what is possible, and then trying to spend a lot of time bringing general moral principles to bear on the situation, and then even making these hard, difficult decisions about what really is moral and what isn't. So from my viewpoint, that's one of the first problems that I see.
Yeah, the theologian or philosopher brings to the medical environment a kind of technical training, a technical background, a kind of abstract way of thinking about a very often abstract set of ideas and concepts, and runs headlong into the medical practitioner for whom abstraction is the last thing that needs to be thought about, because in bed A of room 357 we have a 7-year-old child who has the following disease and the following specific lab results, and we've got to save that child's life or cure that disease or whatever. And very often what happens is that the theologian or philosopher who confronts the healthcare professional does so from his or her own perspective. So we see the theologian, for example, telling the physician, hey, you can't do this kind of thing because theologically it's unsound, that is, it violates the nature of God-given life, or we hear these kinds of things. And the healthcare professional looks at the theologian and says, well, that's all well and good, but now tell me how to cure this child. And so we get this kind of confrontation, which is very difficult to deal with. Robert Veitch, in one of his articles in the Hastings Center report, once, I think, nicely noted the sort of requirement that's needed here, and that is that on both sides of this sort of dialogue, both from the healthcare professional and the philosopher or theologian, each must be a competent amateur in the other's area.
That's well said. Yeah.
So that...
or else you really can't dialogue.
No, you can't, because you don't know what the other one's talking about. Medical practices are very technical, not just jargon, but there's just a lot of specific detail that has to be understood. I spend a lot of time with some medical folks in order to try and keep up with this. I'm by no means an expert. I'm not a physician. I'm not a nurse or anything like this. I spend a lot of time clinically, however, trying to learn about things and keep up with things. And the clinicians that I work with spend some time trying to learn about philosophy so that we can talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But in the absence of that, when we first began to try and work together, it was extremely difficult because we couldn't talk to each other.
Yes. I'm thinking of one of the things that the theologian ought to do is to try to provide a context for the discussion. Now, I think a lot of times the doctors wouldn't want to hear this, or the technicians maybe think it's too abstract and so on. And yet, I don't think we really solve problems well unless we keep that in mind. And one of the things that perhaps we'd want to see is an overall picture where human beings are interacting with their God and trying to co-create a better world. I mean, to take a stab at one way of looking at it. I mean, someone else might say it's God's world, don't tamper with it. God spoke and we should just obey. But the theology that I would represent says more, no, man and God are cooperating in the building up of the kingdom in this world. We are creating with God a better world. In a sense, we are partners with God. We're made in God's image and likeness, and therefore we have a task in the world. And that would immediately free us to use our brains to try to make progress. It would say there's something partly good, at least, about technology and the advances that science has provided us with, that's a human thing to do. So that I think we would get on good terms right away with the scientific people by being able to affirm much of what they do and saying, no, we don't want to block this. The church for so long has been seen to be opposed to science. So we have the fight against Galileo, been against Darwin, against the Freudian revolution. And here, I think very often later on the church has to recant and say, well, wait a second, these people had something to say and we were too quick to condemn them, and now already we are thinking as they said we would be thinking and without even knowing it, as is in the case with Galileo and is the case with Darwin, I suppose, and with Freud. We sort of bought into the whole idea of properly locating our Earth in this solar system of ours, and we have bought into evolution, many of us anyway, and most of us have some sense of the unconscious, just to take those three revolutions as examples, so that perhaps we've been too quick to condemn. And I would like to come at the medical people now and say, no, I want to learn from you, and the theologians need to be in touch with you, and yet we celebrate the general thrust forward, that we're happy when progress is made, and that we want the scientific enterprise to go forward, and for experimentation to be done, always, though, in a proper context, which would bring us to the second principle. But let's just stay with that one for a while.
Yeah, I think maybe that's one of the reasons why philosophers and theologians on the one hand and scientists and physicians and so on the other hand haven't talked as much as they ought to, because if you look at the literature on the philosophy and theology side, a lot of it seems to be condemnatory. Of procedures, of thinking, of practices, and so on. And what the physicians and scientists don't realize is that that's at least part and parcel of the doing of theology and philosophy, is the examination of conceptual frameworks, examination of the logic of arguments. I was at a conference once where there were healthcare professionals and humanists together, a conference on ethical issues in healthcare, and the fellow who was the chairman for the session, who is a physician but who also works closely with philosophers, got up at the beginning and said that it's very important to the physicians in this audience to know that for philosophers and theologians, you can argue about serious issues and still be friends. And I think that that's very important, because what happens is that if we don't recognize that perspective, then it becomes a defensive confrontation. And in that environment, then nothing can ever be accomplished.
Right, so we've got to create a better climate for the discussion to begin
right.
with. And probably, I think, the theologian philosopher type is going to have to make sure that he's not just negative about what's going on, although he can't relinquish his position of being one who critiques and tries to make moral judgments.
That's right.
Perhaps I could throw out, did you want to say something else?
No, what I was going to say, in addition to that, I think it's also important that from both sides, that is, from both the medical scientific side and the philosophical theological side, it's important to contribute a kind of questioning to the other side. That is, it is important for theologians and philosophers to question the merits of various scientific and medical enterprises. At the same time, it's perfectly legitimate and necessary for the medical and scientific people to question theological and philosophical enterprises, because each brings to the other a kind of awareness that new confrontation brings. That is, the philosophers and theologians are so tied up in their own world of issues and arguments that they can't see the forest for the trees. Similarly, the scientists and medical people. And so what each does for the other is point out the trees.
Right.
And it's got to be that kind of a working relationship which is developed. And I am afraid all too often people in both areas are egotistical enough that it's difficult to develop that kind of relationship.
I'm afraid that is true. Maybe we've got to try to make this more concrete. What are some of the problems we're talking about and why people in general should be interested in them? I mean, I think of the problems of when human life ends. All of the problems are connected with do we pull the plug or not? How long do we maintain life at the end of the spectrum? That surely is one part of it, and it is so practical. I mean, many people are faced with that situation with their loved ones. Are they going to have them use extraordinary means to keep them alive, or is a great deal of money going to be spent to keep people alive whose quality of life is very diminished? Very heart-rending kind of problems, human problems involved. I can think of, recently we were involved in a discussion where there was a doctor who took care of the very small babies and was talking about keeping alive 26-week-old babies and so on, and all of the money that goes into that and effort and so on. You've got that kind of question. Of course, we've got all of the questions at the other end of the spectrum at the beginning of the life cycle. The questions connected with abortion and in vitro fertilization and things like that. So other problems, Richard, that come to mind, if we can make it concrete, what we need to dialogue about.
I think that there's a broader range of issues in that. I think of the issues like abortion and termination of the terminally ill, euthanasia, and so on as the biggies. And those are the ones that we hear about a lot. But there's a wider range of problems. I think the broadest having to do with the general sense of self-determination. That is, persons deciding for themselves the course of their life. In medical practices, this means the person may decide that even though a certain procedure would prolong their life, that their choice is that they not have the procedure done.
So if someone wanted to have a pacemaker put in or not.
Yes, good example.
It's legitimate not to do that or not.
Right. Yeah. And the decision, the serious question is that their decision or not. Relative to children, the decisions that parents are allowed or ought to be allowed to make on behalf of their children relative to the remaining life of the child. A parent chooses not to have, as in the Danville case in Illinois not too long ago, not to have a child have surgery whose life could be saved by the surgery because the child was also Down syndrome, mentally retarded.
That was in the news.
Right, that was in the news very recently. So we have that sort of question. We have what seem to be innocuous things, but which are really terribly important, things like truth-telling. The question comes up, is widely debated, do you tell a cancer patient that they have cancer? That relates to the question of self-determination, because obviously if you don't have the information that you need to make decisions, then you're not making your own decisions. So there's questions about truth. Maintaining confidence, confidentiality of the healthcare relations is another important question, because in this world of data gathering and computerization of data and so on, when you go into a hospital, for example, there is so much data gathered about yourself, and there are so many people's hands that data passes through, that the problems of confidence are enormous. That isn't to say, let me very quickly add, that I'm accusing people of being improper in handling this data, but I'm not doing that at all. What I'm saying, though, is that the whole matter of confidence is a serious moral issue in that, relative to rights to privacy and rights to decision-making and things like that. So we really do have a wide range of issues.
And many people will be involved in those one way
Exactly.
or another as their life goes on, right?
Exactly.
And as crises comes and as medical problems arise. So there has to be a general interest in the society in those kinds of questions, unless we're just going to drift along.
Up until now, the tradition has been, at least in the medical environment, that the physician is the one who makes most of the important decisions. In our contemporary society, that tradition is being challenged, so that we now see families being brought more into decision making, the patient being brought into decision making, and so on. But that's only the result of people becoming aware of the tradition and being thoughtful enough about the tradition to decide that at least needed to be questioned, and then we get things like the Patient's Bill of Rights and so on.
I don't think we want to put undue pressure on the doctors in all of this. You and I were at a conference recently where the doctor said you can't put all that responsibility on our shoulders. And I had empathy for the doctor, and I think that he was right. The doctors have their own set of responsibilities, but so do the patients and the families that are involved in all of this. And it seems as though that has to be brought out as well.
Very, very important, because the tradition is that when you go to healthcare professionals, you turn yourself over to them and thereby negate all your own self-determination. And in the development of this tradition, then doctors, for example, have had to take on a role which my guess would be that they really didn't want to take on, but yet which the social development of their profession has given to them because of the way that we approach them. We don't go to a physician and say, okay, doc, let's sit down and talk about my thing and decide together what we're going to do about it. We go and say, okay, here I am, here's what's wrong with me, fix me.
Right. A lot of lay people are just sort of upset with all of that. They always feel like the doctors have walls up, or they're not listening to them, or that they don't have any say in it. And I think that's turning around because people sort of got tired of that, or felt that they didn't need to proceed that way. And I notice a lot of these popular books out now and so on talk about people taking responsibility for their own health. That it's not, you can't put it in the doctor's hands. If you're going to be healthy, you have to work at it yourself. And some of these other books about people who help cure themselves, working with the doctors, but putting in their own ingredients into it, maybe using humor, as that one book talked about, or as using other sorts of meditation techniques and so on, to sort of work along with the doctors. And that seems really important. I'm thinking, that it brings out a general principle here. Again, I was starting to say, what does the theologian contribute to all of this? He contributes talk about the overall context in which we are functioning. And a second principle, it seems to me, is the dignity of the human being, that there needs to be a great stress on that. And that really relates to a lot of the things we're saying, I think. If human beings have inherent dignity, then they have a right to think about their own health, and that has to be put into their own hands in some way. And of course that has ramifications all the way along the line. The way patients are treated in hospitals need to be treated with dignity. I suppose we might think of the very poor people here, who often talk about poor treatment that they receive in some situations, and the need for the healthcare personnel to respect that dignity of the human beings that they deal with. And I think we could use that principle as well to think about the abortion situation, that the unborn life has an inherent dignity, and we have to respect that old people have that, we have to treat them properly, and so on. So that principle, maybe it sounds so obvious in a way, but maybe we need to hammer it home. I remember a group of nurses had gathered together one time and asked me to come and talk with them, and they were dealing with dying patients all the time, and they were talking about their own problems of maintaining their own sense of worth and dignity in the face of so many patients dying, and maybe being treated in inferior ways in the hospital themselves as nurses. And so even in that aspect of the whole situation, that human dignity came out.
I think that's extremely important. I think we have to be very careful, though, because the impression that's given is that the healthcare professionals are the ones who denigrate the dignity of the human being. And I would want to very quickly argue against that in the main, and say that that isn't so much the case, that rather it's the case that the human being, the people that the healthcare professionals are taking care of, don't respect their own dignity. People haven't stopped to think about themselves in a detailed enough way to determine their own self-worth such that they can dignify themselves in the face of these difficult situations, facing their own illness, facing their own imminent death, and so on, so that it makes it seem as if it's the healthcare professional who's at fault for this reduction of dignity when it isn't at all. It's the unwillingness of most of us to reflect on our own human nature and so on, and thus our unwillingness to project our own dignity, which makes it seem then as if others are ignoring it. And I think that's an important thing that we have to...
A point well taken, Richard. I appreciate that. I would want to phrase it in more general terms that all of us humans have to be careful to respect our own dignity as persons and those of others, and that's somehow our fatal flaw, that we don't do that. And we can all do a self-examination of that. Surely the theologian has to engage in that self-examination when we fail to respect the dignity of other people's opinions, for example, or talk down to people or whatever. So I would say that's across the board, and so but as surely somebody in the dialogue has to keep raising it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me throw out a possible third principle here to guide us, and that is that physical life is not an absolute. Now that may sound like a strange one to throw in here, but it seems to have consequences to me. It's something that I would want to tell to doctors when they feel very bad about losing a lot of patients. That, my sense from a faith perspective, it says that death is a passageway into a new and better life, that death isn't always just the worst thing that ever occurs, that it can be seen as a blessing and can always be seen as this transition, as breaking through a barrier into a richer, better life with a larger context, and as we say in popular terms, to go to heaven and to be close to God. And I think that has to be said. I mean, just the pure keeping of people alive in a physical way is not the only thing that needs to be considered. I think there is the quality of life that exists as well.
Yes, and that can't be forgotten, because otherwise what we've done is reduce healthcare to machinery, so that going to a physician is identical to taking your car to the repair shop.
They're going to keep it running.
Yes, exactly. And as you need your car needs a new water pump, so they put it in. Your body needs a new heart, so they put it in. Your body needs a new kidney, so they put it in. Your car needs a new fuel pump, so they put it in. It's that same kind of mechanical, mechanistic analogy. And unfortunately, it seems to me that our I don't know how to say this other than our theology of science, that is our treating of science almost as a religion of empirical data, that the only thing that matters is what we can see and count, is what leads to this. Now, that isn't to say that that's all there is to science, but in the public image, that's all there appears to be. And we have such a love affair with science going that we tend to move more and more in that direction and forget about these other possibilities. And so that we come along with things like spiritual healing, holistic medicine, and things like that, and people take it as a laugh. Why? Well, because we've failed to examine our basic principle, which says the only thing that matters is what we can see.
Right.
And that's the one that needs to be questioned.
So that we human beings are really integral wholes. We have a psychological, emotional, intellectual side to us as well as a bodily side. All of that has to be considered. And from my own perspective, we're also spiritual creatures. That is, we have an enduring kind of life that passes through this barrier we know as death. If we keep that in mind, a lot of these questions begin to look a little different, and
right.
I think that it's important to keep that in mind, even in terms of a lot of the advances we can make in terms of the reproductive processes and so on. Now, maybe we have to take seriously this idea of, do we really want to become a technologized society? Do we want to just tamper with everything? Isn't there a mysterious element that needs to be around? I always go back to that dictum of Augustine that we should work like everything depends on us and pray like everything depends on God. And I still think that is a good side. And good thing, and I'm very in tune with work like everything depends on us, but let's not forget the other side as well. Pray like everything depends on God. That suggests that there is a larger world of meaning here, and that there's a mystery element that we can't just manipulate and control, and that there's a certain submission to that. There's that wisdom to know when we can't handle it anymore, and that there is a proper letting go.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's going to take a return to that sort of reflection before people are going to become concerned enough to worry about some of these issues that we've just brought up in briefly, because they have to be able to see themselves in a certain perspective, and that's what's difficult to do.
The average person is going to have to get this message, aren't they, that we're not just talking really about a dialogue between theologians and doctors, although that's been sort of the framework for the discussion, but the average person is drawn into that because, in a sense, we're all responsible for ourselves, for our own health. That's part of it. Most of us have to deal with doctors sooner or later, and we have to feel this sense of partnership with the doctor. I think, as you pointed out, doctors probably appreciate being taken off of the pedestal in a way and being dealt with in a more humane way themselves. And the doctors can't just have all the responsibility on their own shoulders. And so we say that there is this larger context of meaning in which we function, and that we indeed all have a dignity and worth, and we have to respect that in one another. We expect the doctors to respect us, and we have to respect their particular problems and difficulties. And we have to realize as well that we are spiritual creatures, and that we have a whole life that we're responsible for. And I want to stress that idea from the Christian perspective, that all of it has a deeper meaning, because we're moving finally towards a final union with our God, and that death is a passageway into that richer and better life.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Basic, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Basic in this discussion was Dr. Richard Wright, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was dialogue between doctors and theologians. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirshner.